Hello and welcome to another Canvas and Paint painting session hosted by Garden City Arts. Today we are painting this cute little snowman, and yes, I know it's November, but I think we all could do with a little Christmas cheer this year, maybe a little earlier than usual, so that's what Garden City Arts is going to do. We are going to paint this snowman step by step, and I am going to first show you the painting technique. Then I'm going to put up on the screen the finished product and the step that we're on for about 4 seconds. You can pause the video, catch up, maybe go back and rewatch something if you're not quite sure how to progress, and then just move forward as soon as you're ready for the next step. So now that you understand kind of how we're going to run the painting video tonight, let's talk about what you're going to need. If you purchased a kit from Garden City Arts, then go ahead and grab all of your paint and lay them out on your paint palette, your foam plate, in the order 1 through 7 like you see here. Okay, so all of your colors are mixed and you're ready to go if you bought the kit. If you didn't, you can pause the video and kind of mix up your own colors. You need a cup for paint water. You need your paint brushes. This is the only thing that did not come in your kit that you need. Make sure you have maybe a wash brush of some kind. You could get one as big as 1 inch or as small as a 1/2 inch, and that will be just fine. You need a shader brush. Kind of looks like a wash brush, except it's called a shader because it's a bit small. And then a round brush. So if you have those brushes, you're good to go. You also will need a piece of chalk. Okay, and again, this comes in your kit. We're painting on a dark blue canvas to begin with. It's cerulean blue mixed with a hint of ultramarine blue. And don't worry if it's not absolutely perfect. It doesn't need to be, because we are going to be putting a lot of paint on this canvas. So now that you kind of understand the basics, let's go ahead and get started. All right, step number 1 is nice and simple. It's kind of a warm-up. We are going to focus on the background first, then we'll worry about that snowman. So now is the time to practice good brush technique. And I'm going to use my 1/2 inch wash brush, and I'm going to use the paint labeled number 1. It's cerulean blue mixed with a little bit of white. And I'm going to show you 2 different techniques on how to use your brush and hold your brush. So first off, you can use the top edge of your brush to create really nice thin lines. Okay, you can twist your brush in your hands to make that line curve, okay? Or you can use the side edge of your brush. It fills up more space. A lot of times I will start with a thin line that I use the top edge of my brush and then fill in using the side of my brush. You can turn it just like you turned it with the other way. So that's really the best practices on how to use your brush. Top edge for thin line, side to kind of fill in, or for a thicker line. So our background, we want to feel kind of like a Van Gogh sky, kind of like how he did Starry Nights. So we're going to have one big curve, and then we're going to have some other smaller curves filling in. You don't have to do just one swirl. You could do multiple swirls if you want to. That's kind of what I'm going to do this time, even though I didn't do it in the original, just because I think it's fun to do something different every once in a while. I'm going to use the top edge of my brush, especially when we're starting off. And I'm going to make sure that I'm turning it as I'm swirling it. Turn it as you swirl it. And I'm going to fill in some of my swirls. Now, keep in mind this is a blizzard. It's okay if it's not perfect. Now, here's another principle of painting that's good to remember and very can be used to your advantage. The more water you put in your paint, the more transparent the paint will become. The less water and the thicker the paint, the heavier and more opaque it is going to be, so the less see-through. So you want a combination of kind of thick, heavy paint and a combination of thinner layers of paint. And that's what's going to create your little swirls of blowing snow. Now, once you have like the swirl down, you can fill in the empty space, especially with really kind of watery, transparent paint. And do that just by following the directions. So, you know, in between the swirls, you just put little V's. I'm gonna put one more swirl, maybe right down here, coming the opposite of the last swirl, or I could put it right here. Okay, there are options. I'm gonna put a snowman right there, so I'm not gonna put too much detail and work into that, but you get the idea. So go ahead and fill in your swirls. You do want, and blowing streaks of snow, you do want a concentration. Each one is going to be like heavier in the middle, and then I'm going to use more transparent paint on the edges to blend it in. Okay, so heavy in the middle and then blend it as it fades out or dissipates into the blue. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and quickly kind of get my background the way I want it, and then we'll move on. I'm going to put up on the screen the step that we're on, and then you can just work at your own pace. Okay, so I have color number 1 laid out on my canvas. Now, before I move on, I'm going to talk to you guys about how to properly clean your brush. You want to swirl it in the paint water. You want to tap it on the rim of the can. When you do that, you get all that excess water out, and then you pat it dry. Swirl, tap, and dry, and you'll have a clean, happy brush that's ready to move on to color number 2, which is basically color number 1, just with more white in it. So I'm going to take color number 2, and I'm going to do 2 things on this step. So first, I'm going to make sure that I mix a little bit of water into it. Well, I want a good balance of paint and water, so it's not super thin and transparent, but it's also not so heavy and thick that it's covering everything up. Basically what we're doing with this next color is that we're adding a little, like some pops or some accents to the swirls that we've created. So I'm just coming in here and putting in just a little bit of a hint of this color, this lighter color, on top of what I already done. The idea isn't that I'm necessarily covering up, it's that I'm adding to it in areas. Maybe it covers a few places, but really it's accenting, okay? So you can also kind of add if you feel like you don't have enough of a swirl going on. So I'm just going to add just a little bit. Then after I have that, let's pretend like I have that in both places and I didn't just kind of make a mistake. I am going to flip my brush around, and I'm going to use the back end of my brush to create little teeny tiny snowflakes. So I use the back end, the butt of my brush, and I'm going to do a whole bunch of little dots. You might have to really dip your brush in. There we go. Sometimes you might have to use like the edge or the side of the brush, especially if you have a pointed one like I do. You could also find like a pencil that you're not using or something and use the back end of that. And you want to have some small and some big. The idea or the importance of doing this is to not have them all be perfectly the same size, same shape, and in a very obvious recurring pattern. If the back end of your brush isn't working, you can always use the round brush to put in little tiny dots. I like this for adding littler dots. And you just put on little teeny tiny dots all the way around, going around your swirls, following. And then once you're happy with your little dots, we're ready to move on. So remember, some big, some smaller. We're using thick, not watered down paint for this so that it really stands out against the other blues in the background. And you can use or put on as many or as few as you want. Remember, maybe clustering is good, and maybe spacing out occasionally as well, also good. Variety is good. Okay, so go ahead and keep dotting away until you're happy with your snow. Remember, there's gonna be a snowman right here, so you don't have to necessarily work hard in this area. It's more probably going to be about this area, the right side of your canvas, okay? Keep in mind this is your painting, so if you decide, I want a snowman on my right side and I want to focus on my left, that's cool too. Go for it, okay? All right, I'm just gonna finish dotting and then we'll move on to the next step. For this next step, we are going to be doing a lot of drawing, so make sure that your canvas is nice and dry. Now, if you purchased a kit from Garden City Arts, you will have a cheat sheet in your kit. Now, I forgot to make myself a cheat sheet, so I'm going to be drawing this out and I'm going to be showing everyone at home how to do it. Now, the cheat sheet, if you have it, it is a tracing paper, a piece of tracing paper with the snowman pre-drawn for you. What you do is you flip it over onto the back so that the snowman scarf is no longer blowing to the right, it's blowing to the left. And then you trace out along all of the lines, all the Sharpie lines with your chalk. Then you flip it back over so that the chalk is touching your canvas, and you use a back end of your brush, a hard object like a pin, and you press along the lines and it'll transfer the chalk. Okay, so if you are using a cheat sheet, go ahead and start chalking up your lines. If you want to know how to draw this, then follow me. First thing we're going to do is draw the head. And this is essential because we want to make sure that we have room for the hat and room for the body down below. So I'm going to put my snowman head right about in the middle of the canvas. And I'm going to make kind of a squatty oval. And it needs to be fairly small, okay? The head is the smallest part of our snowman after all. So I'm going to start there, and then I'm going to put another oval on, but I am not going to put it right underneath. That looks like you have a rock sitting on top of another rock, and it doesn't make any sense. Instead, you start the oval a little bit behind the last oval, and then you add to the bottom, okay? This will make it look like scoops of ice cream that have been kind of smooshed together. Next, I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. The snowman needs a slightly bigger body. Next, I'm going to do the very last smooshed circle. So again, not right underneath, not where the last oval left off, but just a little bit behind it. And whoop, tonight my snowman's going to be big bottomed. That's cool. Big bottom snowmen are cool. Okay. So next I'm going to move on to the hat. I start by adding little tiny parentheses on either side of his head, and then I make a curved line, kind of like a hill, to connect the two. That's going to be the brim of his hat. Then all I have to do is add the sides, make sure they're a little smaller than the brim, and then another curved line on top. Should be about the same curve as the brim of your hat. I'm also going to draw a little line for the ribbon that will be on his hat. And there's one more thing that I need to do. Well, two more things. He needs arms and he needs a scarf. So I'm going to do the scarf first because it's going to come in front of the other arm. And basically you just start by adding a swirly, kind of a curvy line. Then go right underneath and thicken that swervy curly line, end it, and then add the second one. This one's going to be a little less swervy curly. Okay, and there's the scarf. Now I just need some arms, and these arms are gnarly branches, so you know, make them gnarly. Like, sure, they should resemble arms, but they also can just be these crazy branches that don't quite look like arms. Okay, so I have my snowman finished. I'm ready to move on to the real step. So I'm going to take my shader brush or my round brush, whichever you want, and I'm going to pop open color number 3, which is not a color at all, it's white. This is going to be what we use for the base of our snowman. Now, when you start doing this, first, you need to make sure that you use the top edge of your brush to kind of outline, and make sure that you're creating yourself a really good guide to follow. So I use the top edge to outline, and then I can use the side of my brush to fill in. Now, second thing you need to know or think about is that this first layer of white is not going to look pretty. You are going to see lots of blue popping through it. That's fine, don't worry about it. I'm going to leave his arms alone. We'll come back to those in a little bit. And I'm going to also leave most of his hat alone. I am going to paint in the ribbon, and I'm going to paint in the scarf. So snowman, ribbon, scarf. And you're painting these all in. So here, snowman, ribbon, and scarf. You're painting all of these in with one layer of white paint. Now, don't stress. Remember, if it doesn't look super pretty, don't worry. We will work our magic on it in a little bit. Go ahead and fill in the ribbon, the scarf, and the snowman, and then we'll move on in just a moment. All right, first layer of white done. And I just want to point something out really fast. So on this first one, I just went straight up and down intentionally because I want to show you how when you go straight up and down, it really flattens it out. Look at these two. I did curvy lines that kind of straighten in the middle and then curve back out the other way on both of these, and it makes it feel more like a round sphere as opposed to a flat circle. So keep that in mind on the next few steps coming up. We don't have to worry about it too much right now, but it will be something we have to deal with here in a little bit. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start with the black paint really fast. I'm going to use a smaller round brush, and I'm going to paint in his hat. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do a second layer of white paint on the ribbon, snowman, and scarf. The reason I am doing the black first is so that I let some of that white paint dry. It needs a chance to dry so that we can do a second layer of paint, and it really will cover and look really nice. With acrylic paint, you have to let paint dry before you try to paint over it. Otherwise, a lot of times what you end up doing is just moving the paint around and not necessarily covering up anything. Okay, remember, add a little bit of water to your paint if you need to. Sometimes your paint can be dry and it doesn't really want to work with you. It kind of grabs at the canvas and doesn't move. If that's happening, add just a teensy-weensy bit of water into your paint. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in the hat black, all parts except for that ribbon. And then I'm going to also add a layer of white paint on my snowman. Now, I'm not going to make you watch me. I'm going to instead put up on the screen the kind of pause screen, so the step we're on and the finished product, so you can work at your own pace. Okay, so we have a hat on our snowman now and kind of somewhat of an established scarf. We are now going to move on to working on our snowman and giving it some shadows. Now, the way we do that with white paint is to use a little bit of light blue for the shadows. So this is the light part of our snowman. It is going to have mostly white. This is the shadowy part of our snowman. We're going to use a little bit of this mixed with a little tiny bit of white. So I'm going to show you really fast how we're going to do that, and then you can work at your own pace and perfect your snowman. I'm actually going to switch brushes, now that I've got my brush dirty, to go with my round brush, because I'm going to be making lots of curvy lines, and the round brush is a really great brush for doing that. If you have pets, you will know the bane of my existence, which is pet hair and paint all of the time. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and grab this light blue paint, and I'm going to go right underneath the snowman's hat to start off with, And I'm going to do those curvy lines that I was talking about. So curvy lines, and then as it gets to the center, it kind of straightens out, and then I can do slightly curvy lines in the other direction. Now I'm going to focus mainly on putting the blue paint on this side of the snowman's face, and not focus so much on putting any paint on, or blue paint on, the left-hand side of the snowman's face. Instead, you can come in with some white and kind of meet somewhere in the middle, mixing the white and the blue together. Okay, so there's my first snowman shadow. Now I'm gonna grab this blue paint, and you might not do what your teacher did. You might mix a little bit of water into your paint to make it a little bit more transparent and let the white show through a little bit more. But then I'm gonna go and do the exact same thing to the next part of my snowman, his body, and I'm gonna make sure that I'm putting a lot of this right underneath his scarf. And then remember, add some water to your paint if you want it to be a bit more transparent. And start in the center and then move your way over. If you get a little carried away, just start with white on the other side, on the left-hand side, and work the white back in, and it'll kind of cover it up. Now, something that I forgot to put in the actual scarf. So I'm going to do that now because I'm going to use the blue to accent the scarf and to help kind of establish it. So I need to make it kind of bulky on that side, curving around his neck, kind of covering up that seam. And then where the scarf ties, I'm going to put a big old knot. So it's going to be kind of round. So curvy scarf, knot, and done. Now, if you want to make your scarf stand out a little bit, take just a little bit of this light blue paint, go in right below. Don't get too much water in your brush or you'll have what I had. Right below and above, and add just a little bit of that and it'll pop that scarf forward. Okay, I just have to do my light blue to the bottom part of my snowman and then I'm done. So again, I'm going to the right hand side of my snowman. I'm putting in this blue paint, and then as I come over, I can switch back to my white, and if I went too crazy anywhere, I can go back over with white paint. Or another technique that works is just wetting your paint down a little bit, making it a little bit waterier and transparent. And there we go. I have shadows on my snowman. I am ready to move on. Okay, the reason we waited until our snowman was just about finished, as far as like shadows and highlights, before putting in our arms, is because we're going to bring this arm in a little bit towards kind of more inside the edge of our snowman. And the reason we're doing that is so that it looks like, just like we did when we were drawing the circles, it looks like it's actually a part of it and not just sitting on top of it. So I'm going to move to color number 5, which is a burnt umber. It's a dark brown. And I'm going to start with the shoulder of my branch, right inside the snowman. And then I'm going to create a gnarly branch and some fingers, and then call it good. I'm going to do that to the other side, except the other side is a little bit easier to do because the scarf kind of hides it. So all you have to do is put in like the indication of the arm in between the flapping scarf, and then you just add all of your parts of your snowman's branch arm, and you're good to go. Okay, that's it. That step was super easy, right? Well, there's one more thing that you can do. You can take a little teeny tiny bit of white, mix it into the burnt umber, make sure that your brush isn't too wet, and once you have kind of a lighter brown, you can come in here and add a little bit of a highlight, and you can do it in little tiny lines so that it feels like wood. Okay, once you have a really gnarly tree branch for each arm, on each side for each arm, you are ready to move on. Okay, we need to turn our attention to the ribbon and the scarf. This is going to be a red ribbon and a red scarf, so go ahead and take the lid off of cap number 6. And the first thing we're going to do, there's going to be a few parts to this step, but the first thing we're going to do is just take our red paint and we're going to paint over all of the white. Okay, now, depends on how detailed you want your snowman. It's really up to you, but I'm going to come back in and add some highlights and some shadows on both the ribbon and the scarf, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. First, let's get a good thick layer of red paint covering up all of our white. This will make our scarf and our ribbon stand out and kind of establish the start of our scarf. Keep in mind, your paint needs to be semi-dry. Okay, don't try to paint red on top of white, because what ends up happening is that you get a pink. That's how you get pink. You mix red and white together. Okay, so let's pretend like I have this whole thing painted. Okay, I'll come back in and fix it later, but let's just pretend for a little bit. And like I have it exactly how I want it, which I don't. I'm going to show you how to do the highlights really fast and the shadows. So you're going to take burnt umber and red, and you're going to mix it on your palette. You want to do 2 parts red to 1 part burnt umber. There has to be a lot more red in there than burnt umber. And that's going to be your shadow. Okay, so you have your shadow. Now you're going to take red, and you can take your orange if you want, or you can take white. Now with this, you have to use very little very little red and a whole bunch of white. Otherwise, red's a bully, it just stays the same. So here's my highlight, my middle ground, and my shadow. I'm going to start with shadows, and then I'll worry about highlights. So the shadows are going to be on the edges. They're going to be kind of towards the bottom, maybe focus on wherever there's bends in the fabrics or folds. So I'm going to go ahead and put on some shadows right where the fabric bends around the snowman's neck. And I'm also going to put some shadows on either side of the knot. Then I can decide whether to put shadows on the tails of the scarf. You by no means have to, but I would probably pick like 1 to be in the front and 1 to be one tail of your scarf to be in the front and 1 tail to be in the background. I decided that one's going to be in the background. See how I put some shadow there? And then you'll also put some shadow on your hat on the edges. Just a little bit. If you get too carried away, no problem. Just swirl, tap, and dry your brush. Clean it off, okay? And then come back in with some red and kind of cover it up. Okay. Okay, so I have my shadows. Now let's talk about highlights. Now the highlights you want to be careful with. You don't want to go too crazy with them, especially since they're pink. I'm going to put highlights, of course, on the left-hand side of my hat, because that's where our highlights or our light source is. All of our shadows so far have been on this side of our snowman. And you can cover up some of your shadows if you need to. Just gonna put a little highlight. For the scarf, I'm gonna put highlight on the bend in the middle where it comes towards us, and then also on the knot of my scarf and maybe on the top of the tail of my scarf. And that's it. Okay, the very last step of our snowman, you've probably guessed, is to give it a face. So we're gonna do coal for the eyes, coal for the mouth, coal for the buttons, and then a carrot nose. You're gonna use black for the coal, white for the highlight, and then orange for the carrot nose, of course. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with my eyes. I'm gonna put one a little bit higher than the other because my snowman's kind of leaning. If your snowman is straight with no lean, well then don't do what I'm about to do. You can kind of decide what looks best on your snowman. And keep in mind, if you make that mistake, like you don't like something, take your paintbrush, make sure it's nice and clean, go back and forth, and look how you can pick it up. You can take off paint. I'm gonna take off the whole eye just to show you. So take off paint with a clean, damp brush. You'll have to clean off your brush every once in a while because it'll get really thick and heavy with paint, which will not help you erase. And then you're good to go. Okay, so keep in mind you can always erase. Don't stress out about this step too much. Okay, so I have 2 eyes. Now I'm going to do really tiny dots for coal for the mouth. And I'm doing them kind of in a curvy line going all the way across. And then I want to make sure that I do the buttons. I don't want them straight or else it'll flatten out my beautiful curvy snowball on my snowman. Instead, I'm going to have one, have it come out a little bit, and then have it come back in. And that will make it appear to be curvier. I may have done that a little too much, but hey, remember, that's why we can erase. Just take a clean, damp brush and push it back or clean it off until you're happy with it. Okay, now inside each of these little black balls, we're going to put a little teeny tiny highlight. I'm going to use the back end of my brush and I'm going to dot on a little teeny, maybe, it's going to make a liar out of me. I'm going to dot on a little teeny tiny dot of white paint. If the back end of your brush isn't working, like it's not working for me, then use the front end of your brush. Oh boy. You know, sometimes paint just doesn't cooperate, and that's okay. Try again. So I'm going to put little teeny tiny white dots inside each one. Kind of stick into the top left corner. And then I can do my carrot nose. Carrot nose is really simple. You do a curved line where it touches the snowman, and then you just do an alligator mouth attached to it. So it's almost like a snow cone, an ice cream cone on its side. And you're just going to take a little bit of your orange paint and make your snowman's nose. Okay, well that's it. You have painted a snowman. I hope that you all enjoyed this painting. If you have any questions, you can always contact Garden City Arts. If you have completed this painting, we would love to see it. Please share it with us. And I hope you have a good rest of your night. Bye. Thank you for watching this Garden City Arts program. Please help us thank our generous sponsors.